Hey, hey, hey. Time for another out-of-this-world story from rSpace. Sometimes the price of betrayal is paid in both cash and credibility. Today on rSpace, it's a double shot of betrayal with a chaser of regret. My girlfriend got my friend drunk and cheated on me. I made sure she lost out on a six-figure windfall. I've been sitting on this one for a while, but I finally decided to share it here. It was an ugly situation in my life, but I'm proud of the way I handled it. A few years back, I was dating a woman who I genuinely thought was going to be the one. Let's call her Michelle. We'd planned out our futures together. Our marriage was definitely in the picture. We were both ambitious people and often spent many late nights bouncing ideas off each other about how we could level up our lives. Back then, I was a fresh computer science grad working on projects with a team of a few buddies of mine. A lot of these were just for fun, portfolio projects and things like that. Eventually, we had an idea that we knew was gold. We put everything else aside and poured ourselves into making it a reality. Before we knew it, it was turning into a serious venture. The problem was that while we were all great coders, none of us had experience managing people, and the growing complexity of the project was bringing some organizational issues to light. The whole buddies working together dynamic began to fall apart under a project of this size. And that brings us back to my girlfriend. She's not a programmer by any means, but she was a social wizard, the type of person that you can't help but get along with. She could read a room like no one else, and she could spot and resolve conflicts before they got out of hand. Since our relationship was so serious, I didn't see any harm in her joining the team. I talked to the guys and suggested bringing her on as a project manager of sorts. The team agreed with no need for persuasion. They all knew her and got along well with her. My girlfriend immediately started handling all the logistical stuff that we usually ignored. She made sure everyone was aware of what everyone else was doing, she kept an eye on our progress, and she kept communication open. Things started to run more smoothly. After a while, it became evident that our project had some real potential. We all got together to draw up a solid business model, creating a compelling pitch, and refine our demo. Once we had everything in order, we reached out to some venture capitalists, hoping to secure a few meets. To our excitement, we actually got a few calls back. It was starting to look like this thing would go all the way. At this point, we legally incorporated our team, officially becoming a company. We had to decide on an equity split, so we came up with 72% for the developers. There were 6 of us, so that came out to 12% each. 8% for our project manager, my girlfriend, and a reserve pool of 20% that we could use for future hires or investors as needed. Everyone was happy with this. My girlfriend had a smaller share than the rest of us, but she agreed that it was fair. After all, we did all the technical work, and she was the most junior member of the team. Fast forward a bit, and we're in talks with a potential investor. This was huge for us because they were talking about a sizable investment at a considerable valuation. I don't want to reveal exact figures, but it meant each of our shares could increase in value hundreds of times. It was a massive step for us, and we were all excited about the future of our company. And that's when everything went wrong. One of my friends, Mark, called me one day saying we needed to talk. I told him to come over, but he insisted that I be the one to come to his place. That was concerning, so I left as soon as I could. When I got to his place, Mark opened the door, and he was a lot quieter than usual. When I sat down, he remained on his feet, pacing all around the living room. "Mark, what's wrong, man?" Mark stopped and sat across from me, and had trouble meeting my eyes. "Last week, me and Michelle slept together." I couldn't believe what I'd just heard. I sat there trying to process it, going through all the possible explanations for what he'd just said. I was certain this had to be some sort of bad joke. The relatively casual way he said it convinced me it had to be some kind of prank. "Come on, Mark, be for real." Mark just looked at me, and it sunk in that he was telling the truth. I swore, and then I got to my feet, but Mark didn't budge. He just sat there looking deeply upset. I decided to hear him out before I beat the tar out of him. "Why?" Mark still couldn't look me in the eye as he explained that she had gotten him drunk. He showed me a text message from her saying that she needed to run through some information with him in person. He'd replied asking her to send it over, but she'd replied saying it needed to be discussed in person. Then she had shown up with some bottles, and they'd toasted to the company's recent success. Mark was a guy who had trouble handling his alcohol, we all knew that. Before long, he was drunk, and she was on top of him. He showed me that she had texted him after that several times, but he hadn't replied to a single one. There were 12 messages from her afterward that were mostly some variation of hey or hi. The one that really stood out to me was, "I really need to know you won't tell my boyfriend about this." Mark looked miserable and kept telling me how ashamed he was and how much he regretted it. I didn't really listen to him. I was too angry. In an instant, everything was falling to pieces around me. The woman I thought I was going to spend my life with had betrayed me, and she had used my friend. I didn't know how to handle it. I could never be friends with Mark again. I had to leave the team and all my hard work behind. I caught myself and stopped letting my thoughts spiral. I was furious at Mark, but he was a victim, just like me. I could be mad at him, but I knew I would forgive him eventually. The real culprit here was Michelle. I thanked Mark for his honesty and told him I needed some time. Then I left. I drove home in a daze. I remember feeling lightheaded and my ears ringing. I was trying to understand why Michelle did what she had done. Why would she sleep with Mark? I mean, saying slept with him was somewhat minimizing it. She R-worded him. She violated and took advantage of him. And why would she throw away our relationship, everything we'd built together? Fair, Mark was good looking, easily better looking than me, but was that really it? Was that enough reason to break us apart? And Mark, I was still mad at him, but I knew that he was probably telling the truth. He might look like the womanizing jock type, but he was a softie on the inside. He was the type that was always concerned with doing the right thing, and he was never the type to shift blame. If he'd had a bigger part in Michelle's cheating, he would have told me. That doesn't mean that I don't blame him at all. If a friend's girlfriend came over and wanted a drink with me, I would have seen through it immediately. I would have put her butt out on the street and then called my friend and let him know what had happened. But Mark was different. He's way too trusting of other people. I gave myself some time to collect my thoughts. And then I got on a group call with the team, minus Michelle. I let them know everything that happened, and Mark was mostly silent. He only spoke up when he was narrating the incident, and to confirm the details when I spoke. I was glad. I was still raw and didn't want to hear him talk much right now. I let the team know that I didn't blame Mark, which was mostly true, and that my proposed course of action was to buy out Michelle. A couple of the other guys were disappointed with this. Before this, we'd all really liked Michelle. I mean, I was about to marry her and she'd helped keep the team on track. But we all agreed that the betrayal went too far. She'd hurt me and she'd used Mark. She was a threat to the well-being of the company. There was a lot of deliberating. What would we do after Michelle left? Who would keep the team on track? Eventually, we concluded that we'd all grown enough to be able to manage ourselves for a while, and that we'd eventually use part of Michelle's shares to acquire a new project manager. Just like that, it was agreed that Michelle was out. Some of the guys weren't completely satisfied. Dennis, who was probably my best friend in the group, said, "She cheats on our boy like that, and we pay her to walk? I don't like it." We all agreed that she needed to hit the road, but a couple of others agreed that they didn't like the idea of us paying her any amount to kick her off the team. I pointed out that I didn't like that either, but the investor wouldn't follow through with us if they did their due diligence and found out we had ousted a member illegally. It needed to be a clean break. Then I brought up the real stinger. The deal was more or less guaranteed to go through, and when it did, each of our shares would be worth significantly more than they were worth at the time. She'd walk away with some cash in hand, sure, but it would be bitter because she'd be missing out on huge earnings in the near future. We went over the shareholder agreement on the call and checked out the buyout clause. All we needed was a legal representative for us to get started, and based on our current valuation, we could buy her out for a little over $25,000. We all agreed that we would each buy part of her shares and use company funds to buy the rest back into the reserve pool. Before we ended the call, our lead developer, Tim, said I should talk to Michelle and see what she had to say for herself. He wanted to make sure we had a clear picture before we pulled the trigger on the buyout. I didn't like the idea and let him know that, but he insisted. For the sake of the company, I agreed, and so I waited for my girlfriend to get home. She was our project manager, but she also had her own full-time job. When she got home, I was waiting in the living room for her. "Hey, babe." She smiled at me as she came in. The smile slid off her face when she saw how serious my expression was. "What's wrong?" "What happened between you and Mark?" I asked. I got straight to the point. No games. She stared at me for a moment. I'm sure she was gauging just how much I knew. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" He told me everything. "You got him drunk and slept with him." "Babe, he came on to me." I sat back and listened to her lies. She told me that he'd invited her over and gotten her drunk. He was already drunk when she got there. She claimed she was scared to tell me because she knew I would take it badly. I told her to quit lying to me. I knew she was the one who invited herself over to Mark's place. He'd shown me the texts. I also knew she was the one who wanted to keep it a secret while Mark had confessed to me himself. She kept arguing that it wasn't true, and honestly, I wanted to believe her. I didn't want to throw away everything we had. "Show me your phone." "What?" "Let me see the texts." Mark showed me the texts on his phone. Maybe he deleted some messages that would have made him look bad. "So let me see the conversation from your side." She stammered, looked for words, and her hand moved to cover her purse, where her phone presumably was. I stood up and took a step toward her, and she shifted back. In my eyes, this was pretty much an admission of guilt. I'd given her an easy way out if she was really telling the truth, and she was refusing to let me see her phone. She was backed into a corner now, so she switched tactics. She started hurling insults at me, berating me for taking my friend's side, calling me a horrible boyfriend and saying that I was betraying her. She said that my friend had gotten her drunk and R-worded her, and here I was, like every other man, believing my friend before her. I got angry, but I refused to take the bait. I just kept shouting that she should show me her phone, and she'd just throw more insults at me. Eventually, I let her know that the whole team wanted her out. I told her that we'd gotten on a call and put it to a vote. She was unanimously voted out, and we would be executing a buyout soon. You won't be turned out with nothing. Your shares are worth about $25,000 in total. I think this is what hurt her the most. She knew how much her shares would be worth once the first round of funding came in. $25,000 was nothing compared to what she stood to gain. Now she got desperate. Or maybe the reality of the situation set in for her. She stopped trying to defend herself and broke down crying instead. She reached for my hands and I pulled back in an irritation. She started telling me that it was a mistake. She'd developed a small crush on Mark during the work correspondence, and she'd never meant for it to go that far. She just wanted to have a bit of fun with him that night. Things got out of hand. I felt horrible about it Afterward, I was thinking about you the whole time. Mark felt horrible about it too, so he came to tell me what happened. All you did was try to hide it and lie to me about it. Then you started insulting me just a few minutes ago, trying to gaslight me. Pack your stuff. We're through. You'll be hearing from the team soon. Tim wasn't happy that I told her about the buyout like that. He wanted us to drop the news on her in person, in a more neutral, controlled setting. Now we had to figure out how to handle her reaction and get her to agree to our terms. A couple of the guys were on my side and said that I couldn't be expected to stay civil after being betrayed like that. Dennis was one of them, and Mark had my back too. Tim and I met with the legal representative to finalize the buyout. We worked through the paperwork and made arrangements for the payment. The agreement stipulated that she would receive $25,000 in exchange for her 8% stake, which would be distributed among the 6 of us and the reserve pool. Michelle refused to cooperate with us at first. She wouldn't answer calls and she wouldn't meet up with us when we asked her to. However, our lawyer had that covered. We simply had to threaten her with a legal action, and she finally gave in. The terms of the buyout agreement were all completely per the buyout clause in the shareholder agreement, so we could sue her for breach of contract if she made any fuss. I let her know that in an email, and she finally agreed to meet up. We met in person in the small office we'd rented for the company. She looked markedly unhappy. She'd thrown away her relationship over a bit of fun, and now she was about to sign away her claim to what would very soon be worth 6 figures, and even 7 in the future. She came in with a lawyer of her own, who went over the buyout clause. He spent a few minutes going over the document, pausing to ask our lawyer some questions every few minutes, and then he would continue reading. When he was done, he took Michelle into the hallway, and they spoke together in a hushed tone for a while. When he came back in, they announced simply that she was ready to sign. I watched with some satisfaction as Michelle signed the document. Her hand was shaking and tears welled up in her eyes. I couldn't bring myself to summon the smallest bit of empathy for her. She'd ruined my life and almost destroyed the team and my friendship as well. Good riddance. Before she left, she turned to the team and tried to say something. I turned around and walked into another room. Later, Dennis told me that she left without speaking after I walked out. It's been a while since I had to cut my ex-girlfriend out of my life, and she's just a distant memory now. She taught me a valuable lesson, and I'm taking it easy with dating at the moment, focusing on building up our company instead. The team is still together, and Mark and I have mostly gone back to normal. As for Michelle, last I heard, she was still working the same job as before. We heard from a mutual friend of hers and Dennis that she was trying to apply for project manager roles, but the way she split up with us meant that she could never use us as a reference. Which one of us would have something nice to say about her? Certainly not me. The best part about all of this is that we've scaled up our team and had a very successful product launch. We're heading towards the second round of funding, after which Michelle's 8% stake would have been worth more than $1 million. Looking back, $25,000 seems like a great price to get a cheating hoe out of my life. It's pretty clear that Michelle's actions showed a complete disregard for her relationship and the company. Her attempt to manipulate Mark and then try to cover it up really makes it worse. At least Mark had the decency to feel bad, which is more than I can say for Michelle. I can imagine it must have been tough to have her walk away with anything, but the clean break was definitely the smart move. Plus, knowing that she missed out on a much larger payday down the road is a bit of poetic justice. The real kicker is how you stayed level-headed, mostly, through it all. Meanwhile, Michelle's scrambling to salvage whatever's left of her dignity. Good on you for handling it with class. Or at least not setting anything on fire. Kudos, OP. What would you have done differently? What's your take on Mark? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. And thank you for joining us today on rSpace. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. Until next time.